The heavy oak door groaned as I stepped into the kitchen. Fluorescent lights hummed with an aggressive buzz that made my teeth ache. Brenda sat at the table in her silk robe, her posture stiff as a board. She looked at the clock, then at my face. I told Ashley's mother she couldn't ground me after she tried to take my car keys because I came home late at 11 p.m. My voice was steady, but my pulse thundered in my ears. She didn't blink once. Brenda stood up slowly, her jewelry clinking like cold armor. She held out a manicured hand and gestured toward my pocket. I could see Ashley shivering behind the marble island, her eyes red from crying. The air smelled of stale lavender and something metallic. This house used to feel safe, but now it felt like a cage with a golden lock. Brenda didn't raise her voice. She simply stepped into my personal space and narrowed her eyes. A single drop of sweat rolled down my spine. I didn't reach for the keys. Instead, I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The landlord's name glowed in the dim room like a beacon. Brenda's expression shifted from smug authority to genuine confusion. She thought her name on the co-signer line gave her total dominion over my life. My thumb hovered over the call button, while the silence stretched thin. Ashley let out a small, jagged sob that broke the tension. The power in the room shifted toward my digital screen. Mr. Steve answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly and alert. I put the call on speaker and watched Brenda's face go pale. He confirmed my rights with a cold, legal clarity that left no room for parental posturing. Brenda's hand dropped to her side as the word harassment echoed off the tile walls. She looked small for the first time in years. Her authority was a paper tiger shredded by a lease agreement. She turned toward Ashley with a look of pure, concentrated venom. The fallout was immediate and calculated. Brenda didn't argue further. She simply opened her banking app with a sharp, final tap. She showed us the screen as she canceled the automatic rent transfers for next month. Ashley gasped, her face draining of color as she realized her safety net had vanished. Brenda smiled a terrifying, calm smile that didn't reach her eyes. She told us that independence had a very specific price tag. The weight of $800 suddenly crushed the air from the tiny room. Brenda marched toward the door without looking back at either of us. She paused at the threshold and whispered, a final warning about ungrateful children. I stood my ground, but my mind was already racing through my depleted savings account. Ashley slid to the floor, buried in the shadows of the expensive kitchen. We were adults now, just like I wanted, but the cost was staggering. I looked at the door and realized the lock was broken. My victory felt exactly like a looming defeat. The kitchen felt like a tomb after the front door slammed. Ashley remained on the floor, her breathing coming in jagged, wet hitches. I walked over and offered a hand, but she recoiled as if I were the intruder. My objective was simple. We needed a budget for the rent gap immediately. I reached for the tablet on the counter to open our shared spreadsheet. The screen remained dark. Ashley had locked the tablet and changed the password during the fight. I stared at the black glass while my anger simmered into a cold resolve. Ashley finally looked up, her face a mask of mascara and raw terror. She whispered that I should have just lied to her mother to keep the peace. I told her that lying was a luxury we could no longer afford at 23. She laughed, a brittle sound that lacked any warmth or humor. Then she admitted she had no money in her checking account. The reality hit me like a physical blow to the chest. We needed $1,600 in exactly 3 weeks, or we would both face eviction. I suggested she pick up double shifts at the coffee shop starting tomorrow morning. She shook her head and claimed her mother would never allow her to work that much. The realization was sharp and painful. Ashley wasn't just broke. She was still mentally shackled to Brenda. She was waiting for a rescue. I spent the next hour documenting the broken door chain with my phone camera. Every flash of the bulb felt like a nail in the coffin of our friendship. I needed a backup plan in case Ashley flaked on her half of the legal obligation. I sent a quick text to my parents, asking for a temporary loan. They didn't reply, which usually meant my father was already drafting a lecture. The silence in the apartment grew heavy. By midnight, I had moved my most valuable electronics into my bedroom. I turned the lock on my door and listened to Ashley pacing the hallway. She was talking to someone on her phone in a low, desperate hiss. I pressed my ear to the wood, trying to catch a name or a plan. She mentioned the emergency key Brenda supposedly returned to the landlord earlier. My stomach dropped into a hollow pit. Brenda still had a copy. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the shadows on the wall. The victory from earlier felt like a distant, dusty memory. I realized then that Brenda wasn't trying to win an argument. She was trying to burn the house down. If she couldn't control me, she would ensure there was nothing left for me to inhabit. A soft scratching sound started at my window. Someone was trying to slide the glass pane open from the outside. I grabbed a heavy lamp from my nightstand and moved toward the window. My objective was to secure the perimeter before Brenda managed to breach my room. The sliding glass rattled again, a thin metallic screech against the night air. I threw the curtains open and saw a dark figure silhouetted by the streetlights. It was not Brenda. It was one of her brothers, his face twisted in a focused, grim scowl. He held a pry bar. I didn't scream or hesitate. I slammed the latch down and shoved a wooden dowel into the track. He stopped instantly and stared at me through the glass with cold, dead eyes. He didn't look like a relative helping a niece move. He looked like a hired enforcer. I realized then that Brenda had sent him to reclaim the furniture tonight. She wasn't waiting for the morning. The power balance shifted as he stepped back into the shadows. A crash erupted from the living room. I bolted into the hallway and found the front door wide open. Ashley stood by the sofa, looking small and useless in the chaos. Two other men were already lifting the television and the entertainment center. They moved with a practiced, silent efficiency that terrified me. Brenda walked in behind them, holding a clipboard and a flashlight. She ignored the overhead lights. She wanted this to feel like a raid. I demanded they stop immediately and threatened to call the police again. Brenda just pointed at the furniture and checked a box on her list. She claimed she had receipts for every major item in the apartment. My jaw dropped as I realized she had kept every paper for 2 years. She wasn't just taking things, she was stripping the unit to the bare walls. Ashley just watched them work. She didn't say a single word to stop them. I grabbed Brenda's wrist to stop her from taking the rotter. She didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she leaned in close and whispered that Ashley had signed a voluntary surrender. I looked at my roommate, who finally nodded toward the floor. Ashley had traded my security for a plane ticket back to her mother's guest room. The betrayal felt sharper than any pry bar. I was being left in an empty, expensive shell. My heart began to race. The men finished with the living room and moved toward my bedroom door. I stood in their way, my chest heaving with a mix of fury and fear. Brenda told them to move me aside if they had to. One of the brothers stepped forward and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. He smelled like cheap tobacco and aggressive intent. I reached into my pocket for my phone. It was gone. Ashley had stolen it while I was at the window. The brother's hand felt like a lead weight on my collarbone. I twisted away and scanned the room for any weapon or exit. My objective was to reclaim my phone before they cleared my bedroom of everything I owned. Without it, I couldn't call the police or record the theft of my personal property. Ashley stood near the hallway, her fingers nervously twitching against her pockets. She looked guilty but remained steadfast in her betrayal. The air felt thick with the smell of sweat and dust. I lunged toward Ashley and grabbed her wrist with both hands. She gasped and tried to pull away, but I held on with desperate strength. I could feel the rectangular shape of my phone, hidden deep in her oversized hoodie pocket. Brenda yelled for the men to intervene and protect her daughter from my supposed aggression. One uncle stepped forward, but I managed to fish the device out before he reached us. The screen was cracked. It appeared Ashley had dropped it during the initial struggle. The uncle grabbed my upper arm and shoved me toward the kitchen counter. I hit the granite edge hard, the pain blooming like a hot iron in my side. Brenda watched with a cold, clinical detachment that made my stomach turn into knots. She held the clipboard like a shield and checked another box on her list. The men began dragging my mattress toward the front door. My room was becoming a hollow cave of echoes and memories. I felt a sudden, sharp realization. Brenda wasn't just taking furniture. She was looking for the original, physical lease document. I had hidden it inside the mattress cover months ago for safekeeping. If she found it, she could destroy the evidence of our signatures and the original terms. I scrambled toward the front door to block the path of the movers. The heavy mattress pinned me against the frame, crushing the air from my lungs. I reached into the zipper and felt the crisp paper. My fingers closed around it. I ripped the document out and held it high above my head. Brenda's eyes widened as she realized I had anticipated her move. The men paused, looking at her for instructions on how to handle the sudden escalation. I told her that this paper was my only ticket to a legal defense. She laughed and said that a piece of paper wouldn't pay next month's rent. The power dynamic shifted back to the brutal reality of our empty bank accounts. The movers waited. Brenda stepped forward and offered a final deal in a low, gravelly whisper. She would leave the mattress in the desk if I signed a formal apology. I looked at the paper in my hand and then at Ashley's tearful face. Ashley mouthed the word please, her voice lost in the sound of the idling truck outside. It was a choice between my dignity and a place to sleep tonight. I tore the lease into 4 equal pieces. The silence was deafening. The uncle shoved me one last time before following the others out into the night. Brenda lingered for a moment, her eyes fixed on the white scraps on the floor. She said that I had finally succeeded in making myself a martyr with nothing. The front door remained wide open, the broken chain dangling like a dead vine. I watched the taillights of the U-Haul fade into the distance. I was alone in an empty apartment. Then, I heard the kitchen sink start running. I walked into the kitchen and found Ashley standing over the basin. She was washing a single glass as if nothing had happened at all. She told me that she wasn't leaving with them after all. Brenda had left her behind as a spy to ensure I didn't find a new roommate. My heart sank as I looked at her vacant, empty expression. I realized the war for the apartment had only just begun. Ashley turned the water off and looked at me. The damp glass slipped from Ashley's fingers and shattered in the sink. I stood paralyzed by the realization that she was staying as Brenda's eyes and ears. My objective shifted from recovery to total eviction of this compromised roommate. I needed her out before she could report my every move to her mother. The apartment felt like a cold, hollow ribcage without my furniture. I stepped over a porcelain shard and faced her. Ashley didn't look remorseful. She looked downed. I grabbed a trash bag and began shoving the scraps of my life inside. The pain in my side flared with every movement, a sharp reminder of the uncle's shove. Ashley watched me from the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed tight. She told me that I couldn't kick her out because she was still on the lease. Her voice lacked its usual tremor, replaced by a borrowed, icy confidence. It was Brenda's voice coming out of Ashley's mouth. The betrayal felt permanent. I reached for my cracked phone to check the time. It was nearly 2 a.m, and the world outside was dead. I realized that, if Ashley stayed, I would never have a private conversation again. She was already tapping a rhythm on her own phone screen. I suspected she was texting Brenda a status update on my emotional state. The power in the room felt lopsided and cruel. I needed a legal lever to pry her loose. A sudden realization struck me as I looked at the broken front door. The lease stated that any tenant who allowed unauthorized entry for criminal activity was liable. Brenda's brothers had forced their way in, and Ashley had facilitated the breach. I told her that she had technically helped people commit a burglary tonight. Her face went pale as the legal weight of my words finally landed. She wasn't just a victim. She was a criminal accomplice now. I started taking photos of the shattered door chain and the empty living room. Each flash of the camera made Ashley flinch like she was being struck. I told her that I was sending these directly to the landlord and the police. She began to stammer, her borrowed confidence evaporating into the cold night air. The power balance shifted back to me as I documented the wreckage. She begged me to stop and think about her future career. I didn't stop until every scuff and broken latch was captured in high resolution. The silence that followed was heavy with the scent of ozone and fear. Ashley slid down the wall, her defiance replaced by a familiar, pathetic sobbing. She confessed that Brenda had promised to pay her tuition if she stayed. It was a bribe wrapped in a threat, and Ashley had taken it. I felt a wave of cold pity for her. She was a ghost. I told her she had 10 minutes to pack a bag and leave voluntarily. If she stayed, I would press charges for the broken door and the stolen phone. She looked at the shattered glass in the sink and then at me. I could see the gears turning as she weighed her mother's approval against prison. She stood up and walked toward her empty bedroom without saying another word. I finally felt a flicker of true hope. The end was near. I waited by the door while she stuffed her remaining clothes into a pillowcase. She walked past me without making eye contact, her head bowed in shame. I watched her go down the stairs and disappear into the darkness. I finally closed the door and wedged a heavy chair against the handle. I sat on the floor and closed my eyes for a second. Then, I noticed a small, blinking light in the corner of the ceiling. The blinking red light was a tiny, digital eye tucked into the smoke detector. I stood on the kitchen chair, my ribs screaming with every inch of height I gained. My objective was simple: kill the connection before Brenda saw me alone in the wreckage. I pried the plastic casing loose with trembling fingers. A small, wireless camera fell into my palm like a dead beetle. Brenda had transitioned from a hovering mother to a literal domestic spy. The apartment was a live stage. I stared at the lens and felt a cold, oily shiver crawl up my neck. This was a felony, level invasion of privacy, far beyond a petty lease dispute. I realized that she had likely recorded the entire night, including her brother's forceful entry. This realization was the sharp lever I needed to dismantle her entire campaign. The power shifted as I realized the camera was my strongest evidence, not her threat. I tucked the device into my pocket. My side ached with a dull, throbbing heat. I needed to secure the apartment before Brenda realized the feed had gone dark. I dragged my heavy desk across the hardwood floor to block the main entrance. The wood groaned and left deep, permanent scars on the finish. Every shadow in the corner now felt like a hidden lens or a waiting ghost. I checked the bathroom and the closets with a frantic, systematic energy. There were no more cameras, but the psychological damage was already done. The silence felt heavy. Morning light bled through the windows, gray and unforgiving against the empty walls. I called a local locksmith and told him it was an absolute emergency. He arrived within the hour, smelling of coffee and industrial grease. I told him to install a heavy-duty deadbolt and a reinforced strike plate. He didn't ask questions about the broken chain or the hollow living room. He just worked with a silent, professional speed that I envied. My bank account was nearly empty now. The locksmith handed me 2 silver keys and charged me $300. I watched him leave and felt a momentary sense of physical safety. My phone buzzed with a series of frantic, typed messages from an unknown number. It was Ashley, begging me to return the camera before her mother did something drastic. She claimed Brenda was already calling the police to report a stolen device. The microtension escalated into a full-scale legal war. I didn't reply to her. I called out of my marketing job and walked to the landlord's office. Mr. Steve looked at the camera on his desk and let out a long breath. I showed him the high-resolution photos of the broken door and the empty rooms. He told me that Brenda had already called him twice this morning. She claimed I had physically assaulted Ashley and stolen her personal belongings. The lies were getting bigger and more dangerous by the minute. My heart hammered against my bruised ribs. Mr. Steve pulled out a file and showed me a signed affidavit from Brenda. She was trying to declare the apartment abandoned to force an immediate lockout. This was a sophisticated legal maneuver to bypass the standard eviction laws. I handed him the camera and told him exactly where I found it. His face hardened into a mask of professional, icy rage. He hated being a pawn in Brenda's twisted family games. The balance of power swung toward the truth. He told me to wait in the lobby while he called his attorney. I sat on a hard plastic chair and watched the clock crawl forward. A woman in a sharp business suit walked in and stared at me. She was the building's legal representative, and she looked ready for a fight. I realized that my survival depended on the next 10 minutes of conversation. The air in the lobby was thin and smelled of old paper. I felt very small. The lawyer beckoned me into the back room with a sharp, brisk motion. She told me that Brenda's actions had created a massive liability for the management company. They wanted her gone as much as I did to avoid a lawsuit. They offered me a temporary restraining order and a new lease agreement. I would have to find a roommate within 30 days or leave voluntarily. This was the irreversible decision I had to make. I signed the paper. I walked out of the office with a legal shield in my hand. I felt like a different person than the girl who came home on Friday. I had traded my friendship and my furniture for a cold, hard independence. As I reached my car, I saw Brenda's SUV idling near the curb. She didn't move or speak. She just watched me through the tinted glass. I realized the camera wasn't the only way she was watching. She was still there. I drove past Brenda's SUV without flinching, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. My objective was to find a replacement roommate before the 30-day clock ran out. I spent the afternoon posting clinical, honest ads on every housing board I could find. No mention of the drama, just the price and the reinforced deadbolt. My side felt like a dull, hot ember under my shirt. I needed to move fast. Brenda was a shadow that refused to shorten as the sun set. By Tuesday, I had 3 candidates lined up for a tour of my hollow home. The first was a graduate student who frowned at the scarred floors and the lack of furniture. She asked about the broken door frame, her voice sharp with a natural suspicion. I told her the truth about a former tenant's family without using any names. She nodded once and walked out, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. I realized then how much a home needs its skin. The second applicant was a quiet woman named Jordan who worked in cybersecurity. She didn't mind the emptiness. In fact, she seemed to prefer the sterile environment. We discussed the lease terms while sitting on my lone kitchen chair. She looked at the new deadbolt and asked who had the spare keys. I told her only I did, and I intended to keep it that way. She smiled for the first time. It was a cold, understanding expression that I liked. Midway through the tour, a heavy pounding started at the front door. My heart dropped into my stomach as I recognized the rhythm of Brenda's brothers. Jordan stood perfectly still, her hand moving toward the pocket of her tactical jacket. I opened the door just a crack, the heavy chain straining against the frame. Brenda was there, holding a legal envelope and a smug, jagged grin. She claimed she had a court order to retrieve Ashley's forgotten medication immediately. I didn't let her in. I told her to wait while I checked the bathroom cabinets myself. Jordan stepped up behind me, her presence a silent, formidable wall of muscle and shadow. Brenda's grin flickered as she processed the change in the room's energy. I found a single orange bottle tucked behind the mirror and handed it through the gap. Brenda grabbed it, her eyes darting past me to assess my new potential ally. She didn't like the new math. Jordan waited until the hallway was silent before she spoke again. She told me that she had a set of cameras that were legal and encrypted. We could install them tomorrow if I signed her lease agreement right now. This was the moment I had been waiting for, a chance to lock the world out. I reached for a pen and signed my name with a steady hand. The power balance shifted. I was no longer a solitary target in a cage. The next morning, we moved Jordan's gear into the apartment in a few hours. She brought a couch, a television, and a sense of order that I lacked. We worked in a rhythmic silence, mounting sensors and testing the new network. I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders with every clicking latch and secured screw. My marketing job called twice, but I ignored them to focus on my perimeter. I was building a fort, not a living room. By evening, the apartment was a fortress of high-end tech and heavy furniture. Jordan showed me the monitors on her laptop, a grid of blue, tinted security feeds. I could see the hallway, the parking lot, and the back window in crisp detail. I realized then that I was finally safe from a physical breach by Brenda. But Jordan had a strange, intense focus on the digital side of our defense. She spent hours staring at scrolling lines of code and firewalls. I asked her what she was looking for in the middle of the night. She whispered that someone was trying to hack into our local wireless signal. I looked at the screen and saw a series of failed login attempts. The source was a device registered to a house only 3 blocks away. Brenda hadn't gone home. She had rented a unit nearby to stay in range. The tension coiled tight again. She was literally trying to ghost us. Jordan tapped a final key and a grainy image appeared on the screen. It was a live feed from a car parked across the street from us. Brenda was sitting in the driver's seat with a laptop glowing in her lap. She looked older, more haggard, and completely obsessed with our windows. I realized that she wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a predator. Then, Jordan's screen turned bright red. Our new security system was being bypassed from the inside. The red glow reflected in Jordan's glasses as she frantically typed. My objective was to find the breach before Brenda saw our internal private feed. I realized the attack was coming through the smart thermostat Ashley had left behind. Jordan ripped the device from the wall and the screaming alarm finally stopped. Silence flooded the room, but my hands were still shaking with adrenaline. Brenda's obsession had moved into a digital haunting. I felt like a ghost in my own apartment. Jordan pulled a small circuit board from the back of the broken thermostat. She showed me a hidden chip soldered onto the motherboard with sloppy, amateur precision. Brenda hadn't done this alone. She had hired someone to build a backdoor into our lives. The power balance shifted as I realized Brenda's desperation was becoming a trail of evidence. I reached for my phone and recorded the modified hardware in high definition. This was the definitive proof for a permanent restraining order. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just an inch. Brenda was still sitting in her car, but her laptop was now dark. She looked up and locked eyes with me through the distant, cold glass. I didn't hide this time. I stared back with a terrifying, calm resolve. She finally put the car in gear and slowly pulled away into the night. My fear had finally transformed into a sharp, icy clarity. I knew exactly what to do. The next morning, I stood in court and presented the camera and the chip. Brenda sat across the room, her lawyer whispering frantically into her pale ear. The judge looked at the evidence and then at Brenda's wary, hollow face. He signed the permanent order and barred her from any contact with me. I felt the lie of my isolation finally break into a hard truth. Security wasn't about being alone, it was about choosing who holds the keys. Jordan and I spent the afternoon resetting every password and digital lock we owned. The apartment finally felt like a home instead of a battlefield or a stage. My side had healed into a thin, white scar that I barely noticed anymore. I sat on my new IKEA couch and watched the sunset over the city. I had lost a friend, but I had gained a life that was truly mine. The peace was quiet and heavy. A single text message arrived from an unknown number as I was falling asleep. It was a photo of a moving truck parked in front of Brenda's house. Ashley was standing near the tailgate, holding a box and looking toward the camera. She looked tired, but she was standing on her own 2 feet for once. I didn't reply or save the image to my phone. I simply deleted the thread and closed my eyes in the dark.